Well, a very good morning to all of you, and I'm delighted to start this recognition, which we do every year, and it's a great one. By the way, could we get the blinds down some? I see some sun is in the eyes of some of those students. Is David up there? Can we try to get those down? Thank you. Yeah, it's very impressive, huh? So there are so many things we celebrate at this school, and one thing I often say to families who are looking at the school or alumni, and I say one of the things I think marks this place so special is the pride we have in each other's achievement. There is, I think, a unique culture where the fact that one person is successful does not mean it's come at the cost of someone else. And so we celebrate music and athletics and scholarship and all kinds of things here. So today is a day where we really celebrate the great scholars on our campus. And I will do, my opening remarks are about scholarship, but in a way they're really about somebody else and someone you may not know about that I feel obligated and inspired to speak about. And it's a man named John Estey who passed away 2 weeks ago and who was Taft's headmaster for 9 years and was an amazing man. So when we lost John Estey on October 22nd, I lost someone who had inspired me more than I'm sure he ever knew. And it's really right on this day where we recognized a great scholarship on this campus that we remember John Estey. He was the school's third headmaster. The school's only had 5, and he served from 1963 to 1972. Many of you will not know of him, of course, because you've come to Taft years later, but his legacy is profound and permanent. To be clear, John and I did not overlap here. I came as an upper mid 4 years after he had left, and I knew him only by reputation when I came as a young teacher in 1983. But something unexpected and beautiful happened in the years after I became headmaster in 2001. John and I struck up a correspondence. It was an intermittent but wonderful exchange of letters and phone calls, and from that unusual relationship, and to be clear, it was probably a total of a dozen calls or emails or letters, and from that, I drew really deep pleasure. I would write him every year at the end of the year to invite him to come to the end of the year faculty party. And for many years, until his health slipped gradually, he would write back a personal note, often with well wishes, often with some humor, often with a little pep talk to keep me going in those tiring days at the end of the year. Several times he wrote me with thoughts on an article that I had written or perhaps a talk I had given. Invariably, I ended up thinking, this guy is a lot smarter than I'll ever be. He was genuinely interested in the challenges I faced and indeed that all educational leaders faced. And he often had funny stories to share to make me feel better about the work I was doing and to put my own problems in perspective. Once he called up to say, Willie, you're going to be receiving a big box of books from me, and I hope they'll be interesting for you and I'd like you to have them. And a big box arrived, and I remember cutting it open, and there was that old musty paperback smell of books that had been put away for a long time. And the titles showed a man of the most inquisitive and principled and restless intellect. The Reform of Secondary Education, The Promise of Education, The Good High School. One book that I looked at even recently was entitled On Knowing, Essays for the Left Hand, and it had comments written in pencil in an impeccable hand. Page 70. Note conversion of impulse in art. Page 142, the bad effects of limiting the growth environment. You could see how actively he read, as if he were carrying on some brilliant conversation with the text. He was the model of a lifelong learner, and he made me want to ask as good questions as he did, to have the creativity and boldness that he had in thinking about education. Over the years, our correspondence dwindled, but somehow I felt he was always interested in me and Taft, and his presence in my mind made me want to do better. John Estey was a remarkable leader and headmaster, of course, and many in the Taft family applaud his incredible leadership in the late 1960s, a time of hugely difficult change and complicated social upheaval. The challenges he faced were enormous. His years included Vietnam, draft protests, civic unrest, sit-ins at universities, and he led here with remarkable wisdom and calm and humor. His successor, Lance Odden, the great headmaster from 1972 to 2001, was a close friend of John's. And he often shared with me his sense that Taft owed an enormous debt to John Estey for the ways in which he steered this school through those turbulent years. Those of you who have Mr. Brown, a pretty impressive guy himself, will appreciate his memories of John Estey. He wrote me, John Estey became headmaster when I was a senior. He then became my boss when I taught Latin at Taft in my first teaching job ever. in the second semester of 1971. He was one of the smartest, funniest, wisest, kindest men I've ever known, and a friend and mentor for decades. His tenure as headmaster may have been short by Taft standards, but his influence was incalculable. Now, there's no question whatsoever that all of us in here inherited his legacy, just as I did when I was a student. In three major areas of school life, John was a visionary, a man of extraordinary courage and vision and intelligence. In a sense, he gave us the school we have today. You might think of it this way. John pulled and maybe even dragged the school of the 1950s into the modern era. No person is more responsible for doing that than he. Remember that when he became headmaster of the school in 1962, Taft looked a lot like the school in the 1950s and perhaps even the 1940s or even 30s. It was not much different. When he left 9 years later, Taft looked much different. It was a radically and much different school, a better one, and it looked a lot like the school you see today. There are many reasons it happened, but John deserves enormous credit. Here are the three areas that we all owe an enormous debt of gratitude. First, in the fall of 1971, and after over 80 years of being all boys, Taft became coeducational under his leadership. To be fair, the school had flirted with the idea for a long time. The Board of Trustees had done some strategic planning to ask the question, and there were many in favor, but of course, like every single-sex school, there were considerable concerns about the move, and John was profoundly committed to the idea that Taft needed to become co-ed. If we were going to lead, he felt, in particular as he looked at the social landscape, we had to become coeducational. He was committed to the idea that education meant opportunity and that girls deserved this opportunity as much as boys. He was a keen observer of the landscape, and he knew this had to happen sooner rather than later. He was a low-key in terms of advocating for this change, but it mattered deeply to him. And his son Dan wrote, "Every fiber in my father's body was committed to equality." He was low-key, he was brilliant, he was persuasive and funny, and when Lance Auden became headmaster after him, John had done something incredibly important for him. He had resolved perhaps the thorniest issue that any school faces. From that day on, the school was transformed. Taft rapidly earned the reputation for being a school that welcomed and was great for attracting smart and confident and talented girls. Without John Estey, the fact is I might be today addressing a room all of boys. Here's the second thing that he did that we all owe a debt of gratitude for. He was passionate about creating opportunities, about committing to socioeconomic opportunity and diversity and equity. He was a product of Deerfield and Amherst, two institutions that we might think of as elite institutions, but he was anything but an elitist. His son Dan shared, he was tremendously committed to raising people up. He felt education was the key to individual development and to societal development. And so he led efforts to reach out, to develop partnerships and expand opportunities, especially to underprivileged students. He helped launch and then serve as chair of A Better Chance, the nonprofit dedicated to providing opportunities for students of color to attend independent schools. He led Taft's effort to recruit students from the inner city, and then even after he left Taft, he spent 20 years volunteering at Fenway High School, a pilot school in the Roxbury section of Boston, a school with 90% minority enrollment, and a school where he was beloved. He knew that education was a force of social and economic mobility, and his entire life was committed to that principle. And then third, in his tenure, he redefined and expanded what our curriculum looked like, and he did so in stunning ways. Remember that when he took over in 1962, Taft was a highly traditional school in its academic approach and philosophy. And within 2 years, he had created the Independent Studies program, which at that time was an amazingly bold and innovative, risky, exciting, and even controversial initiative. The goal was to provide students with a chance for truly independent scholarship, and within a year, ISP was a singular part of his legacy. Students signed up by the score, even in that first year, to write poetry and plays and study literature, to analyze foreign policy, to study water pollution, and on and on. Other schools came to Taft, and they interviewed and observed, and they tried to replicate. It is impossible to overstate how revolutionary that was. It's not just that the ISP endures today, now as you all know, led by Hinker and Benedict. It's that I would argue that the faculty's insistence on innovation and that hunger for excellence and that willingness to try new ideas, I think that is very much rooted in his leadership. I would be proud if my life was 1/10 as distinguished and generous and principled as John Estey's. He set a really high bar. Deerfield graduate, magna cum laude graduate of Amherst College, master's from Yale, first lieutenant in the U.S. Air Force, Amherst dean, Taft headmaster, president of the National Association of Independent Schools, trustee on countless boards, father of a remarkably successful family, published author. His resume is staggering, his gifts to education immeasurable, his commitment to opportunity profound, and his legacy astonishing. But he would be embarrassed by my very remarks. He was all I have described, and he was something rare in a person of his talents and intellect. He was deeply humble. He was almost without ego. He was, as his son Jed put it, quote, completely disinterested in honors and status. He transformed many lives, and certainly this school, and he cared not at all for credit. He just wanted to serve others. In my office, I have a 2001 photograph of John and Catherine Esty, and Lance and Patsy Odden, and Pam and me. This morning I hung it on the door so you can see it. You'll laugh when you see what I looked like in 2001. But you'll also see two of the great headmasters of the school, and you'll see John Esty, who was so singular and so influential, and I think so profoundly transformational. He transformed this school. I stand in a shadow of these two men, and looking at it this morning, I thought of how much I'd missed my correspondence with him. He probably would have said something really smart about my remarks today, probably joke, tell me I should stop talking about him and get back to work. I'll miss that. Taft was lucky, and all of us are, that he led and changed this great school. And with that, on a day where we celebrate the great scholarship on campus, I'd ask Mr. Clifford to come forward. He will read the names of the PSAT winners, our ranking scholars, and then we will conclude with recognizing those inductees into Cum Laude. Thank you.
The following students have received commendation from the National Merit Scholarship Program for their outstanding performance last year on the PSAT, finishing in the top 3.3% of all test takers. Emily Axelberg, Vade Chowdhury, Tyler Dullinger, Garrett Guiney, Allison Sue, Jae Hong James Lee, Ha Young Michelle Rowe, Brian Tomasco, Leon Vortmeyer, Alexis Walker, Paige Whittemore, Hannah Wilczynski, Kelvin Zhu, and Alexander Yan. One Taft student was named a semifinalist in the National Merit Scholarship Program for her outstanding performance last year on the PSAT, finishing in the top 1.1% of all test takers, and that's Kayla Kim. Ironically, Kayla cannot be here today to receive any of her awards because she is actually right now taking another standardized test for UK college admissions. So she will not be here. She's otherwise occupied. These are the ranking scholars for the 2014-2015 class based on the highest unweighted averages in their classes. When you hear the name, if you're the recipient, please stand and remain standing. For the class of 2018, last year's lower mids, with an average of 96.5, Emma Stone. For the class of 2017, last year's mid-class, with an average of 97.7, Sunny An. And in the class of 2016, last year's upper mids, with a 96.2 unweighted average, Leon Vortmeyer. Founded in 1908, the Cum Laude Society is the national scholarship society in secondary schools, corresponding to Phi Beta Kappa and Sigma Xi in colleges and scientific schools. A maximum of 20% of the senior class may be elected into membership in the Cum Laude Society. This morning, we will induct 14 members of the class of 2015 who merit inclusion in the society based on their academic records for both their middle and upper middle years. At this spring's graduation, this first group will be joined by other seniors whose selection will be based on their records for their upper mid and senior years. The 14 students inducted this morning represent the top 8% of the class, with weighted averages that over these past 2 years range from a 96.6 to a 100.2. Will those being inducted in the Cum Laude Society please come forward when I call your name? First recipient is I. T. Min Bui. Natasha Yasmin Chung. Lydia Gutu. Isabel E. Homburg. Shinzan Sonia Huang. In absentia, Kayla Marie Kim. Audrey Chi-Hei Lam. Jae-Hong James Lee. Lanting Liu. Michael Rousseau Mulder. Brian Alexander Tomasco. Leon Alexander Vortmeyer. Hannah Catherine Wilzinski. Alexander Jusuf Yan. Iwei Eva Zhang.
Well, many thanks for the attention and that chance to recognize these remarkable scholars, and also to remember, as I said, this great headmaster who I think transformed the school and who embodied, I think, the very best in learning and scholarship, and that's John Esty. So with a congratulations to all of you and many thanks, we are adjourned. Thank you.